Are there certain characteristics and behaviors that result in benefit and more efficient, fruitful multiplying?
Of course.
Aren't the, so are
That's
those
divine, but this is, hang on, this is divine command, justification from divine command. It has nothing to do with libertarian nonsense of constitutional egalitarianism.
I think instead of having a discussion on the merits of what rights might mean, you're instead upset over what libertarians think rights might mean, as opposed to what I'm actually trying to say.
Okay, well, do you justify rights as coming from God?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, then we're fine there.
What? It says Tim Pool debates Andrew Wilson on human rights, divine mandate, and God's will. Human rights. I'm assuming because one of the more fundamental points to being right-wing is that rights are God-given or they are just innate. They are some sort of thing that you have inherently. They are not something that government gives, and it's kind of like a thing to make fun of. That people on the left think that rights are given by government, or that it may not even be funny. It's just sad. It's just sad that their rights are given by something so much higher and so much more powerful and so much bigger, and they mean so much more. Yet the left thinks just some random humans can give rights endowed by our creator. So again, it is a little bit nuanced. I would say yes for the majority of them, but there are a bunch of right-wingers who are not religious and don't believe in a God, yet they would still say that generally it's a pretty hardcore stance to be right-wing. It's pretty fundamental to believe that rights are inherent, even if there isn't a God, which I don't know how that works. It doesn't make sense to me. I've heard people try to make the argument a number of times, Jewish people, but who aren't secular, the non-religious Jewish people. But yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. I would assume that's going to be the argument.
Government enshrined protections are not real. Rights that as we know them, are just things that we recognize as things of value to us. So for instance, I usually define it as simply, you have a right to speak freely. If you're in the middle of the woods and you're buck naked, you can say whatever you want. You have a right to keep and bear arms. Pick up a stick, sharpen it, pointy stick, you can defend yourself. Ain't no one going to stop you. The question is, when you get into conflict with someone else, where is that line drawn? So the reality is, rights are recognized as things that we can and must do to survive and maximize potential.
I think rights are force, and I think that...
You think rights are force?
Government
rights
protection.
What do you mean rights are force?
You're talking about government protection.
No, I'm talking about period. I'll explain what I mean. A right, to me, is an entitlement absent duty. That's a right. Okay? You're entitled to it, but you have no duty.
What does that mean?
It means that you have it...
It means that it's a privilege. You don't have to do anything to get it. It is something that you feel you deserve, but you didn't have to do anything to deserve it.
So okay.
Entitlement to speak.
Yeah, so if you have a right to own a gun.
To speak.
No, hang on, let me finish. If you have a right to own a gun, do you have a duty to own a gun?
But do you have a duty to speak?
No, you don't have a duty to speak.
If you have a right to vote, do you have a duty to vote?
So it would be an entitlement.
That's your argument.
It's an entitlement,
but
absent a duty.
But you can speak.
Yeah, you can.
And so
until you can't.
The question
until somebody stops you with force.
So you're talking.
Okay, that is not what I thought he was going to say. That so far it doesn't make any sense. I don't understand that whatsoever. You have you have the right, but you don't have to do it. I thought he was going to say, you have a right to own a gun, but you don't have to do anything to have the right to own a gun. I thought that that's what he was saying. A right without a duty is, but he's saying you don't have a duty to own the gun. What? I feel like that's everything. I feel like that's most things. I feel like that's literally everything.
Talking about government restrictions are made up by us as a people.
Just people can adhere to your rights without any form of government. If you're walking down the street and you speak, and a guy turns around and smacks you in the mouth and breaks your jaw, right? He has now used force against whatever this right you think you have to speak. You have no right to do shit except whatever you can enforce. Right. Your mechanism is force, and the mechanism against you is force.
And so
all rights are force.
You're talking about government protections, not rights.
No, I'm talking about rights. What is a right?
So it is an intrinsic moral function.
Well, okay, intrinsic meaning what?
It means if I'll try to explain. If you're born and you live in the middle of the woods, there are things you can do. You can hunt for food, you can defend yourself, you can speak freely. Now, what we've done in the United States
Unless
is
you're born blind and you can't talk, right? Then where does your right to speak come from?
you lack the ability to speak,
Right.
but you still have the means by which you are allowed to do it.
Yeah, but what makes it an intrinsic right to be able to?
Well, freedom of speech doesn't actually just have to do with speech. It is the freedom of expression. You are able to express yourself the way that you want, meaning that you can type, meaning that you can wear the clothes that you want, meaning that you can hang signs that you want, wave flags that you want. Like, freedom of speech is the freedom to expression. So even if you're not capable of actually literally speaking, you are still capable of expressing yourself, meaning you still have freedom of speech in this case.
Then where does your right to speak come from?
You lack the ability to speak,
Right.
but you still have the means by which you are allowed to do it.
Yeah, but what makes it an intrinsic right to be able to do? Like, where does this idea?
He's making this intrinsic. He's starting with intrinsic. That's where the question starts. And I'm curious if Tim is going to stop him there and say, "Oh, I don't believe it's intrinsic. I believe it's given to us by the government." Or if he's going to buy this intrinsic right premise and try to justify it. I am very interested to hear this, because Tim loves to do the, I'm really a liberal. And I'm kind of I kind of just happened to vote for Donald Trump because Democrats have gone woke. They've gone too far. They've gone way too far, and they're so woke these days that I can't deal with it. But if he does justify an intrinsic right, I'll feel like it. That ship's already sailed, obviously. But I'll feel like this is more objective.
Idea come from other than you axiomatically kind of just
Evolution?
say, you say because I can do something, I have the right to do something.
It's part of a evolutionary biological structure
So
that resulted in the survival of humanity.
So if I like grab a spear,
Okay, so he's justifying the intrinsic right, and that the intrinsic right is a biological, like imperative that we have. I'm assuming we have something within us that makes us treat each other this way, or feel that this must be the way. You must be able to say what you want. Well, I think China feels different. I think Russia feels different. I think there's some countries, North Korea might disagree with you there.
and I can stab somebody with it, I have a right to.
No, that's
Why?
that's attacking
different.
somebody. That's
Yeah,
violating.
but other
that's a
than
whole
an
bunch
axiom of you shouldn't do that because I just don't feel like you should, what makes it intrinsic that I don't do that?
that you don't go and kill another person.
Yeah.
So the way I view rights would be things that and again, there's a debate over what rights are.
Yeah, let's start with that. What are they?
No. So there, it's honestly difficult to define, but it is certain moral structures or.
I would
things
say
that are-
axioms. Would you agree with that? Just an axiom. So like, you have inalienable rights from God according to the Constitution. This is an axiomatic principle. It means this is our like philosophical starting point, is that we have these.
I would put it as things that were required or greatly beneficial to the survival of an individual that we greatly benefit.
I agree.
Right,
I agree. We
it's-
benefit. I just don't know what makes them.
Freedom of speech, again, freedom, your right to own a gun or your right to speech, these are things that you're capable of living without. Tons of countries have done it. The majority of history has done it. They've been able to live. We're all here today. We made it. Congratulations, guys. We did it without those rights. Meaning that, Tim's argument here just doesn't make sense at all. It can't be this inherent right that exists. He's going to have to appeal to norms at some point in order to justify this, which is why, and I've said this a bunch of times before, is that with rights being something that is given, it's not something that the government gives, but it is something that is an inherent. It's an inherent thing. I don't think that. Yes, I don't think unless you're religious, you can't believe that. I don't think there is any justification of this without being religious.
Some intrinsic, or like you're born with them, or something like this. Other than we just kind of agree to it.
So I think the restrictions we kind of agree to. And some people might view some things as rights and other things not as rights. Like the left thinks healthcare is a human right, which makes literally no sense.
No sense.
But in terms of your ability to speak, you can walk around, you can speak, to defend yourself, you can pick up a stick, you can defend
But
yourself.
this goes back to the same argument. I can grab a spear and murder somebody. I can do that.
I don't think it's ridiculous to believe that healthcare is a right. I don't think that's ridiculous to believe. It's just that, again, when the left is talking about rights, they're talking about just the government's giving you this thing. This is a government protected thing. They protect this. This is a thing that they will make sure you have. That's all they think a right is. And so when they say, well, healthcare is a right, they're not saying it currently actually literally is a right. They're saying, I think it ought to be. I think it ought to be a right. I think this is something the government ought to protect. They ought to give this to us. It's more like an entitlement. Sure, it's just it's a privilege. It's like it's something that is there. You don't have to work for it. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to justify it. It is just yours. This is yours. You get it. Done. End of story. And then these are negative rights that we're currently talking about, right? We're talking about negative rights. Healthcare would be a positive right. So a negative right is something that you have freedom from the government. It is a protection from the government. Whereas a positive right is something that the government must give you. So negative means they can't take it, and then a positive right means they must give it. And these are there. I don't think anybody would look at any positive rights. I don't think anybody can look at any positive rights and say that is inalienable. That's an inherent right. It is a God-given human right that you get tax returns, or I don't know. I can't think of it. What are positive rights in the Constitution? I don't know why I can't think of any right now. The Constitution does not contain any positive rights, but many state constitutions do. Okay, well that might be why. Okay, yeah. So like education, does our Constitution really not? Wait, our Constitution really doesn't have education in it? No, the United States Constitution does not explicitly guarantee a right to education. The Supreme Court ruled in 1973, San Francisco Independent School. It does talk about like your right to vote though, and your right to leaders and things like that. I would think that those are positive rights, but maybe not for some reason. Okay, weird.
Why don't I have a right to do that?
Because you are now causing harm to another person, which is a detriment.
But why is that valuable?
Why are other people valuable?
Yeah, well, why would that be an intrinsic value? So like I can
one would result in the end of humanity, and one results in the expansion of humanity.
Well, no, both can result in the expansion of humanity.
Right, but absolutely not. You're completely wrong.
No, I'm completely right.
You are wrong. Self-defense can result in expansion of humanity if you're using destruction for the purpose of ending something that is destructive. Mm-hmm. But if you are wantonly going around murdering people, you're actively reducing and harming humanity.
Well, okay, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't expand humanity by harming people. There's
so
nations
the argument
that do
of self-defense is there are things that we believe we must be able to do for the betterment and survival of humanity.
Yeah, but when I'm asking you this question, right, I'm asking the foundation from which you say I have the right to speak or write.
We need to be able to in
like
order to survive.
You because you need to do something. So I'm not sure how that means you have a right to it though.
Okay, so speech is not
you
just
have to
saying
eat.
words.
You have a right to eat?
Yes, 100%.
Really? You have a right to do that?
Why would you
Yes,
not
you don't have a right to own
So if I have,
but you have a right to eat, otherwise you'll die.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Do you have a right to breathe? What about breathing?
These are good questions, right?
Again, I don't think you understand.
You have the right to, what is it? Life. I'm so tired now. My brain isn't working. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That I would assume that is part of life, is being able to eat.
Understand, we're talking about intrinsic behaviors that are required for survival versus the government and humans deciding what we shouldn't have.
I don't think we're speaking past each other. I'm asking what makes them intrinsic. When you say I have a right to eat, okay?
If you don't, you'll die.
If you have if that guy has all the food over there, you no longer have a right to eat.
We're not talking about your right to steal from others. If you're standing if you're standing in the woods by yourself, eat that mushroom.
Okay, got it. You can eat the mushroom. But what makes it a right to eat that mushroom, and what makes it not a right for a guy standing next to the mushroom to say, I have a gun and I don't want you to eat that mushroom?
You're now once again talking about laws.
Again, it is, yes, it is. This is why none of this can make sense. This is why none of these arguments will ever amount to anything, is because if for Tim, who is not religious, it just is what the government gives you. That's it. That's it. Obviously, in China, they do not have a right to freedom of speech. Obviously, in China, They do not have a right to bear arms.
And restrictions.
Yeah, okay, but my whole theory is that rights themselves are force, and that's all they ever are. It's just your ability to use force to do thing you want to do.
I think you're just making
you call that a right.
I call rights things that are essential.
Yes, but I don't use force to do it. I do not use force to speak. I do not use force to own a gun. I don't do that. The government uses force so that I can speak and so that I can own a gun. It is the government's force. So through like other lines of logic, like technically to some extent, Andrew is correct, but Tom, they haven't mentioned the government yet. They've mentioned it. Where he just said, "Oh, you're talking about laws." That's what they're saying through the government, but when they're talking about the right to own a gun or the right to speech, they're obviously talking about like constitutional rights. How do you have a right to this? Why do you have a right to this? But there is no way to justify this without saying the government. Like you just can't do it.
To the survival of humanity.
So you have a right to your heart beating and your blood flowing and to blink and to...
Yes.
Okay, so if you just...
now you misunderstand because once again you're talking about government again.
How is this government? It doesn't need to be government.
If you are standing in the middle of the woods and your heart is beating, your heart has a right to beat. If your heart fails and you die, you died. What?
Yeah, see, everything that they're talking about, this is all just blah blah. It's just whatever. Because yes, if you're totally excluding all laws, all constitution, all government, all of that, well, now it is... now all Andrew is saying is might makes right. That's what he's saying. He is saying might makes right. I don't know why he can't just say that. So he has to say it in a weird way to make it difficult. It's might makes right. You're not coming up with something like super like brilliant and new or anything. No, it's just might makes right. You're saying I can do it because I can. That's it. That's it. That's the end of it. I can do it because I can. Unless you stop me, I'm going to do it.
If you're making an argument that someone should or should not be allowed to do something is an entirely human social construct.
I agree.
Right. I'm saying that the reason we have protections of rights is because we've determined certain things are required for the reasonable survival and expansion of humanity.
Yeah, I agree. We agree to those things, and we act as though they're rights.
And the Bill of Rights.
But I don't think rights themselves exist.
The Bill of Rights is a recognition of certain things that we do for the betterment of survival that must be protected from government. Now, if you want to argue the amendments in the Bill of Rights are nonsensical, fine. If you want to have a moral argument or a philosophical argument about what is required or intrinsic to the survival of humanity, by all means have that argument. But rights do exist. It just means some you might not agree with and some you might think aren't. Those are philosophical debates.
Yeah, but when you say exist, right? Do you mean outside of your brain they exist, or do they only exist as a construction of your mind where you say, I have a right to do X?
If we observe creatures in the wild, we will see them required to do things to survive.
Yeah, okay, so...
If you inhibit those things, they will die.
So
This is the most retarded conversation about rights I've ever heard. They are literally at the point where they are now talking about just, like, things that you do to live, and then calling them rights. He's literally talking about eating. I have a right for my heart to beat. I have a right for my heart to beat. I have a right to blink. I have to blink. I have to. My eyes will dry up if I don't. And then eventually, if they dry up, they'll get infected and I'll likely die. So I have a right to blink my eyes. I have a right to it. Like, this is the most ridiculous way of talking about rights I have ever heard. Like, I would be much happier talking about, like, yes, like, are rights God-given? Are they... are they government given? Are they, but this, I have a right for like neurons to, this is actually ridiculous. This whole thing is just, this is a childish conversation. This sounds like two middle schoolers trying weed for the first time, and the first time you smoke, you don't get high, but they're both pretending that they're high. That's what this sounds like. So they want to look cool and like, oh, I saw in the movies that like they get really deep and philosophical when they smoke. So that's what I'm gonna do to pretend that I did get high. Oh no, I did get high. No, I'm so high. Do you know I have a right for oxygen to go into my lungs? Did you ever think about that before, bro? Oh, did you ever think about the fact that we have a right for poop to come out of our butts? Yeah, we have a right to it, because if we don't, we'll die. Eventually our gut will fill up and explode, right? We have a right to it. Yeah.
Well, if just rights
protect
to you,
those things.
So the rights to you just mean things which are a requirement for your existence?
And typically we define them as such because they transcend the basic obvious things like breathing and drinking water.
Owning a gun isn't a requirement to your existence.
No, defending yourself is.
Yeah, but
if a bear comes in the middle of the woods and you don't have the ability to defend yourself, you cease to exist and humans cease to exist. So humans do defend themselves. Then as human society, we've decided this should be protected, otherwise humans will cease to exist.
Yeah, but why? Okay, but this makes no sense, right? So if all right is to you, Tim, is thing X which is necessary for the survival of a man, in this case blinking and breathing and eating and pooping and whatever, you have the right to.
Yes.
Poop shall not be because you have a right to do that because it's like something you need to do to be alive.
Right, but you can't poop on someone's floor.
Why couldn't you extend that to literally everything? You need healthcare to survive. You need guns to survive. You need a house to survive. You need everything to survive.
I think we should move on, but I think the challenge is, I don't know if you're unwilling to understand.
I think we should move on.
You have no right to take other things from other people, to take their labor. You have no right to force a doctor to perform surgery on you, but you certainly have a right to ask him for it.
Those are just assertions. Like, you just assert these things as though they have a grounding epistemic foundation from which you can make the assertion. Based on where do you make the assertion that you're not allowed to do X?
So the issue is that Andrew is starting with things that we would consider some sort of right. He's starting with things that we would think of this as a right, like a right to speak. Okay? We say that you have a right to speak. We say that you have a right to speech, right? So what is that then? What is that thing? What are we talking about? I'm going to define it. Now I'm going to define what I think that is that we're doing when we say a right. And he's working backwards to look at what it is that we're doing, and then trying to define it, which is a good way of obviously coming up with a definition. That's it's a good way of coming up with a definition. But the definition they're using totally different definitions, where Andrew is trying to explain what it is he sees in some sort of way that he thinks aligns with it, where generally just rights are just things that are afforded to you. That's just the way we think of it. Then when the UN says that you have human rights or something like this, or the World Health Organization says you have human rights, blah blah blah. These are prescriptions. They're saying governments ought to protect these things. Governments ought to protect that. But that's all it is. That's all it is. It became a jumble of semantics. Yeah, I don't think either one of them are recognizing it. But it isn't that they're disagreeing on what the things are. They're starting with just totally different definitions and then working their ways forward to the things that now they're calling rights. And now they're actually calling different things rights. Whereas like Tim would, just kind of call blinking and pooping and all of those rights now. Those are all rights. Whereas Andrew's saying, I wouldn't call any of that a right. I'm saying you have a right to do whatever you're capable of doing. And you're only capable of doing things based on the amount of force you're willing to use to do it. That is going to be the parameters on where your rights start and end, is just based on the amount of force that you're willing to use to defend those rights. That is a right. Whereas, Tim is more in this like philosophical sense of like what he thinks of as a right, because human biology has made it to where we have to do that. And so because human biology says we have to do it, I'm going to call it a right. I don't know why you would ever call that a right. I don't know why. And I don't know why either one of them are talking about rights without government. I don't know why. And it doesn't, like, I know why Andrew would want to, but my thought process is Andrew would want to do that because he wants to explain that there are God-given rights, that God gave us these rights, and they are inalienable rights because God gave them to us. That is it. That is the only reason. We have the rights because God gave them to us. But he's not arguing that they're God-given rights. He's saying, no, you got your rights. You have your own rights. Your right is whatever it is that you're willing to defend. Whatever it is you're willing to fight for, that's your right. Not even that you're willing to. Whatever you're capable of defending. Yeah, it's not about will. It's about capability. Your right is whatever it is that you can, physically defend or otherwise.
other than because Tim Pool's preference is that you don't.
And I'm literally saying you're talking about laws and social order right now, not human behaviors for survival.
I think human behaviors are laws and social orders. I think you're saying the same thing.
No, if a person was in the middle of the woods, they'd be foraging and looking for food.
Yeah, what does that have to do with what I just said?
You're talking about what the government
human
can and can't do. I'm talking about what humans need to do to survive.
Yeah, okay. Well, humans also have to have other humans around to survive.
And so this is communication is essential. The right to defend yourself is essential. The right to secure your possessions is essential. These things, without them, humans cease to function properly. And then you get the Soviet bloc, you get starvation, you get genocides.
It's
and
also
this is a detriment
it's a function of our belief system in the United States that we have natural rights. I mean,
I agree with that.
That's a huge part of
I
it.
agree with that. I agree with that, that in the United States, we agree that we have them.
You can say, I think you can
Not
say
sure that
everyone,
we do.
I think that you can say that everyone has these rights, and it's a function of whether or not their government allows the rights to be recognized.
That's the contention. When you say, I think everybody has these rights.
Yeah, that is my belief.
Yeah, it's a belief.
Yeah.
Based on
existence. I mean,
based on just your preferences.
So there's,
I don't think it's a preference. I think everyone has a right to breathe. And
and you do. In the big picture of what are the list of
I don't know what that means. What does that mean, though? What does it mean you have a right to breathe? What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. They're not like, I don't think I've gotten a definition from Tim on what a right is, but I've gotten reasoning for why he calls them rights. So over and over he says, no, that's a right because if you don't do that, you're going to die. Okay, so is that the definition of a right then? Is that how you're defining a right? Is a right is anything that you have to have in order to live?
of fundamental rights that exist to humans, cultures debate these things wildly, but there are a small handful which are true and correct. If inhibited, a person dies.
Agreed. But what I'm saying, I guess my overarching point, and I can just kind of tie it off with this, is that when I say rights are forced, what I'm saying is the thing that you say is necessary, breathing, eating, these types of things. I think that those things, which you call rights, really are just force. You're saying I will use force in order to do this thing that I want to do to necessarily exist. And that another person can use force to stop those things from existing.
And then you can use force to stop them.
Right, and then you can use force, et cetera, et cetera.
Right,
but all we're really doing is just moving the goalpost of force around, right? So if this group says this group does not have the right to breathe, they do not have the right to eat, they do not have the right to do any of this shit, and they go and put a stop to it, what are we appealing to for why it is that you can't do that?
That group doesn't have the right to do that.
Yeah, but that makes no sense.
Like
why wouldn't they have the right to do that?
I feel like
saying might makes right, which is...
Well, it's beyond that. I think you're making a postmodernist argument for why you should be allowed to do things that other people don't want you to do.
I think no, I think the opposite is true. I would use a justification of God. And I would appeal to something which is unchanging and an unchanging standard for moral justifications for oughts. But what you're doing, when you say a right and you're appealing to like the Constitution, that's postmodernist subjective standards of nonsense, right? Just like
no, it's moral
we all decided that we have these rights, so we do. There's no justification for any of them.
So
Zero.
You don't believe in any intrinsic moral foundations?
No, I do believe in intrinsic.
Princess 499. Appreciate the dono, homie. I don't get how you do these late night streams. Just built different. That's all. Appreciate it.
Moral foundations and epistemic justifications and ontological justifications which would come from God.
I think you're doing deconstructivist reasoning to argue why...
It's just basic philosophy. It has nothing to do with deconstruction or postmodernism. Basic philosophy, you have to have a justification for a position.
And when I've given you one, you just reject it every time.
Yeah, well, because they're axiomatic. So you haven't demonstrated why the axiom or the starting point...
You haven't demonstrated.
You haven't demonstrated why we do, other than because I observe that if we don't act in this way, you expire. But it's like, okay, but why is that even bad? Like, why is that even a bad thing?
Why is it bad that humans cease to exist?
Yeah, why would that even be a bad thing from the worldview of rights? Like, oh, okay, if you don't have this right, you die. But you haven't justified why that's even a bad thing.
Because humans exist through a pattern of evolution towards, or creation, whichever you decide, for to be fruitful, to bear fruit, and etc. These things are components of creation and life. I think this aligns perfectly with like a Judeo-Christian moral worldview, and I think these things are requirements for the efficient expansion and fruitfulness of humans. So they are natural, either from an evolutionary standpoint,
It sounds like he's saying one has the fundamental right to survive, but rights are things given to us from an outside higher power. Right, right, that's why I'm saying this is just like an odd semantic argument where they're just using very different definitions. So let's see. A moral or legal entitlement to have or obtain something or to act in a certain way. So yeah, I mean, this defines it based on legality, but I think Andrew just called that postmodernist, so I don't know.
Humans developed to inherit certain requirements to function efficiently, and when these things are curtailed, we see inefficient
I don't think I've ever heard that called postmodernist before.
and collapse, disease, and chaos.
This is circular. So
How?
you go, okay, we need to bear fruit and multiply. Why? Well, because then we can exist.
'Cause God
Why do
said
we
so.
need to exist? Because then we can bear fruit and multiply. Okay, but why? Because then we can
Okay,
exist.
you're just being contrarian for no reason.
No, it's not contrarian. I'm giving you a real
You
principle.
believe in God?
Yeah, I'm a
So if
I'm
I say
an
God gives you a
Orthodox
mandate,
Christian.
so when God says has a mandate to be fruitful and multiply, you say yes or no?
Yeah, of course.
Are there certain characteristics and behaviors that result in benefit and more efficient, fruitful multiplying?
Of course.
Are
That's
those
divine. But this is, hang on, this is divine command, justification from divine commands, nothing to do with libertarian nonsense of constitutional egalitarianism.
I think instead of having a discussion on the merits of what rights might mean, you're instead upset over what libertarians think rights might mean as opposed to what I'm actually trying to say.
Okay, well, do you justify rights as coming from God?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, then we're fine there.
What? What? Andrew just walked over him. But that's Tim for you. I mean, I have never heard Tim say that before. I feel like I may have heard him maybe say that he believes in that, like, no, I don't know. God gave us all the rights to wear beanies. Yes, he has a right to wear a beanie. He needs it to live. Basically, all you have to do is the God told me to defense, and Andrew's good. Well, I mean, it makes sense from Andrew's, like, as he was saying, from his epistemology, like, this is going to make sense within his axioms, like, that's where it has to lead. But I've never heard Tim say that he believes in God before. I could have sworn Tim was an atheist and that he prided himself on being an atheist. This is wild.
But so I think we actually agree. So then if that is the case, if whatever you think rights are come from God, then whatever else we're appealing to external to God for where a right comes from isn't really a right, right? It's not really a right.
I think that life, goodness, creation, there is deep overlap. I think a simple way to look at it is, yin yang, within good there is some evil.
Okay. I just Googled, like, Tim Pool believes in God, looking for, like, an article or something. The first things that pop up are this. Tim Pool tweet, believing in God should be illegal. Okay? Tweet 1. Tweet number 2. It should be illegal to not believe in God. This is from March 2nd. This is also from March 2nd. So I was hoping I was going to get some clarity here. And instead, it is exactly how I felt before I searched for it. So
Within evil there is some good.
Mhm.
And a way to explain that is sometimes we have to destroy to create. What does that mean? If there's a mass murderer who's murdering children, we don't want to, but we stop that person to defend ourselves and others' lives. I think that there is divine mandate that we
So I feel like if somebody asked who Tim Pool was, I would show them those 2 tweets. Radical Coder, what it do, homie? I feel like, yes, if somebody said, who is Tim Pool? I'd be like, oh, actually, I've got him summarized right here very perfectly for you. Here you go.
we must be fruitful and multiply. We are here to organize, to create. There's a secular way of looking at it. It's evolution that developed us to this point where we have internalized these things that we must do, or that result in a more efficient way of life, or more
Which is
simply,
what you said earlier.
there is a God, there is a divine structure and mandate which results in certain things that are beneficial to mankind that I would describe as good and just, and there are things that are evil and unjust.
So as we get to the heart of it then, right here, where we come to this agreement, where I reject this, is I think all the things you just stated are duties. They're duties. They're the opposite of rights. You have a duty.
I just think we're having a semantic argument.
Well, but semantics are super important, so we don't speak past each other. So when I say a duty, it's an obligation to do a thing based on the fact that you're commanded to, in this case by God. A right, I would say.
Yeah, it's actually kind of annoying. Lots of people will say, "Oh, that's semantics, bro." I wonder sometimes if people get confused between semantics and pedantic, because something being pedantic, I could understand because you're kind of like implying that it is already like meaningless and small by calling it pedantic, right? But semantic, you're just saying that like you guys have different definitions for the same word generally is what people mean. You're like those are valid arguments to have a lot of the time. That is a valid argument to have. It's funny, somebody today, I forget who, but it was somebody today was saying that when I debated Destiny last about the Andrew Wilson debate that he had, that I was having a semantic debate. We didn't have a semantic debate. We were having a debate over the fact that his definition applied to something. We weren't using different definitions for the same word. I'm telling him your definition does include this. And yeah, it's kind of annoying that people like. So it's the biggest frustration is that I've watched it back like 3 times. I literally could not be any clearer in that entire thing. Like, I've watched it over and over thinking, okay, what could I have done to get this across more easily? The one thing that I think I could have done is just said, like, shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. Listen, seriously, do not say a fucking word. I'm going to explain my argument one more time. You are out of your fucking mind. You are arguing with ghosts. Do not say another word until I finish explaining my argument one more time. And know that before I start explaining this, that I'm not defending Andrew's argument, okay? Here we go. Just listen. Like, I feel like that is literally the only way I could have done it, and I was trying my best to avoid that. I think eventually I did pretty much do that, and that's how we got it across in the end. But yes, that is all I could have done, and for me to have done that at the very beginning, I would have looked fucking crazy. The fact that I did it at the end, I didn't look crazy. It looked pretty justified at that point, but the thing you should have done is pay no attention to Andrew. Well, I didn't. I'm talking about a debate with Destiny. That was, yeah. You should have told Destiny to not be so emotional and triggered. Well, he was using it, again, I was there to ask questions. That was it. I was there to just ask questions, just kind of wanted to understand his perspective in the debate. That was it. All of my questions the whole way through. That's all I was doing. I had all my questions written down before I went in, and on the very last point, on the very last question, he did it for like the 3rd time, was imply that I was defending Andrew's points and that I was this right-wing Trumper who's brainwashed and refuses to admit the truth. And at that point, yes, I had to get across what it was I was saying in order to leave that call not sounding like a Trumper. That was it. That was all. That's all I cared about, was just making sure that my point was clear. That's it. But yeah, the fact that, like, yes, the somehow the misunderstandings are so broad, and so, like, so many people have so many different thoughts on what they think was happening there. And what my position was, what Destiny's position was, you can go to my comment section, and every person who's trying to say how retarded I am are either totally missing my argument or totally missing Destiny's argument. There's numerous people who are actually arguing that I'm retarded and that I don't understand, and then they literally make my exact argument. Like, right there. Like, fuck, dude. I hate this.
Is an entitlement absent duty. So if that's the case, what you're listing out is like, God is giving us these duties to do. I'm not sure what rights he's giving you.
I'm saying there are certain behaviors that there are certain behaviors, there are certain functions of life that are a component of God's divine plan, mandate. And I could argue it in a secular way for people who don't believe in God or whatever.
Sure.
There's a natural structure of the universe that says to humans, be fruitful and multiply. And these things are important for the efficient structure of such.